The air was thick with anticipation, the kind that lingers before a storm. In the heart of a small, dust-blown frontier town nestled between two great ridgelines, the church stood proud, weather-worn but upright, like a soldier who'd survived too many battles. Inside, candles flickered against worn wooden beams, casting soft light on the expectant faces of townsfolk seated in solemn rows. The preacher cleared his throat, sweat glistening at his temple, not from the heat, but from the tension swelling in the room. At the end of the aisle, Eliza May Callahan stood in her mother's lace dress, tailored at the waist and hemmed with the care of someone who knew what it meant to hold on to memory. Her hair, the color of wheat in dying light, was pulled back with a delicate veil. Her hands, calloused from years of work, trembled only slightly against the bouquet of wildflowers she'd picked herself that morning. The smile she wore was soft, restrained, practiced, not giddy, but hopeful, like someone learning how to believe in beginnings again. Thomas Braxton entered with boots heavy and stride sure. His suit was a touch too fine for someone born to cattle and dirt, but it had been pressed for the occasion. His eyes scanned the church quickly before resting on Eliza, and something in his jaw shifted. Barely perceptible, but enough. He nodded to her, no smile offered, and walked up the aisle with a posture that had stiffened since the night before. Eliza's heart skipped once. She told herself it was nerves. As the preacher began his sermon, murmurs twitched in the pews. Not loud, but enough to catch Eliza's ear. Mrs. Harding, the milliner, whispered too audibly to her husband. Someone else covered their mouth in mock shock. Eliza tried to ignore it. This was just the town being what it always was. Restless, suspicious, starved for drama. It meant nothing. Then came the silence, the kind that eats sound and leaves only pulse. The preacher had asked the customary question, the one that gave an out. If there be anyone who knows why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever, hold your peace. A voice didn't rise. A foot did. Thomas took one slow step backward. The audience stilled. His gaze moved not to the preacher, not to the crowd, but to Eliza. She already has a child, he said, voice low but certain, like a verdict. The flowers slipped from her hand. They hit the floor with a whisper of petals, softer than the gasps that followed. Eliza didn't move. Her face was carved in disbelief, the color draining from her cheek so gradually it was like watching a sunrise in reverse. The words didn't register at first. Then they echoed, cruel and clear. She lied to me, Thomas continued, turning to face the gathered. She told me she was a widow. She didn't say she was a mother. The preacher opened his mouth to speak, but it was too late. The crowd had already begun to turn, some in murmured disgust, others in scandalized delight. The town ran on whispers and pride, and today it had been fed both. Eliza stepped forward, her voice hoarse. I never lied. You never asked. Thomas laughed, a sharp, joyless sound. Don't twist it. You knew how this town sees things. You knew what it would mean. I wanted to protect her, Eliza said, and now the crowd hushed again, straining to hear. She's a child, an innocent. You loved me, Thomas. Does that change because I loved her first? He looked at her then, really looked at her. Something, conflicted, passed across his eyes, but it didn't linger. He turned his back without another word and walked out of the church. The heavy wooden doors shut behind him with a finality that felt like thunder. Eliza stood alone at the altar, her chest, rising and falling not from sorrow but rage held back by pride. The preacher reached for her arm gently, but she stepped away, chin high. I think this service is over, she said. Outside, the sun had lost its brilliance. A slow wind kicked up the dust in lazy spirals. Eliza walked through the street, veil, trailing behind her like smoke. People parted, but no one offered comfort. They stared, hungry for more but unwilling to choke on what they'd helped create. At home, the air was still. The silence was familiar. Her house always held its breath. When she returned, she stepped into the parlor, loosened the laces at her back, and let the dress fall into a heap. She stared at it for a long moment before folding it with gentle, mechanical movements. Later that night, as she sat with a glass of rye in hand, a knock came at the door. 3 soft raps, not urgent, not uncertain. She opened it to find a man, taller than most, his face half hidden by the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat. His coat was thick, dusted with earth, and his boots had seen years of roads unkind to men. His voice was deep and low, like it came from someplace older than words. "I'm looking for Eliza May Callahan." She didn't answer, just raised her chin. "I knew your husband," he said. "Elias Callahan. He saved my life in the war." There was no immediate response. Her fingers tightened around the doorframe, eyes scanning his face, searching for truth or danger. "He wrote about you. Said you'd make it out west. Said if anything ever happened to him, I'd know where to find you." Eliza hesitated, then opened the door wider, motioning him in. "He didn't remove his coat. What's your name?" she asked. "Hawk," he said simply. "James Harrow. Some call me Hawk." "Why now?" "I got delayed. Chased ghosts too long. Ended up with a promise I couldn't shake." He pulled from his coat a letter, brittle and yellowed at the edges. Eliza took it, her hands almost too numb to open it. She didn't read it then, just pressed it against her chest. "I heard what happened," he added quietly. "At the church." Eliza looked away, out the window. This town never needed much of a reason to turn. "You handled it." "I didn't fall apart," she said, "but I didn't walk away either." He gave a small nod. "Your daughter, she's still near?" "She's with my aunt, up by the ridge pines. I didn't want her in the middle of this. Thought I could build something before she came home. You still can." His words settled like dust, quiet and heavy. "I'm not asking for help," she said. "I've gotten by long enough on my own." "Didn't offer any," he replied. "Just delivered the letter. I'll be moving on in the morning." Eliza studied him again, her eyes now softer, layered with questions she didn't voice. He turned to leave, but before his hand touched the doorknob, she asked, "Was he scared when it happened?" Hawk paused, his back still turned. "No, he was angry. Said he had something to get back to, and he meant you." Then he left. The door shut softly, and Eliza stood there for a long while, letter pressed to her chest like a shield against the world. The next morning she rose early, dressed plainly, rode the half-day journey to her aunt's cabin. Josie, her daughter, was playing in the creek, hair tangled, eyes bright with joy. She turned at the sound of hooves and ran into her mother's arms. Eliza held her longer than usual, whispered apologies that the child didn't understand. Hawk stood at a distance, arms crossed, watching the moment as if it belonged to someone else. When Josie glanced at him, she tilted her head. "Who's that man, Mama?" Eliza looked at him too. "He's someone who knew your daddy." Josie walked toward him, no fear in her steps, only curiosity. "Are you a soldier?" "I was," Hawk answered softly. "You have a horse?" "I do. Can I see it?" He nodded, and for a moment something rare crossed his face, an almost smile. Eliza watched them from the porch. Hawk helped the little girl onto the horse, his movements careful, reverent. Something shifted inside her, not easily named, but strong and clear. The town would talk again when she returned. That part never changed, but something had cracked in the pattern. A man had arrived, not to claim, not to fix, but to witness, and maybe, to stay. And that changed everything. The first night in the woods was restless, fractured by every snapping branch and distant howl. Eliza sat with her back against a pine, Josie curled up against her side, her tiny body trembling despite the wool blanket. Hawk sat across the small fire, sharpening a blade that had clearly seen more years than some men lived. Sparks leapt from the edge of the steel, catching briefly in the darkness like fireflies that knew no joy. Eliza tried not to stare. Hawk rarely looked up, but when he did, his eyes met hers with unspoken weight. Not suspicion, not threat. Something closer to watchfulness. He was a man who said little, and in that silence, Eliza heard things that couldn't be spoken anyway. That he'd walked longer roads. That he'd known betrayal that left no scars on the outside. Josie stirred in her sleep, murmuring. Eliza stroked her hair, whispering comfort. Just a dream, baby. She dreams light, Hawk said suddenly. Eliza raised an eyebrow. What's that mean? She doesn't flinch, even asleep. She's not scared of things she's already known. Eliza glanced at her daughter. She's seen enough for 2 lifetimes, but she still smiles in the morning. I don't know how she does it. You taught her. The fire crackled between them, filling the silence that followed with its own kind of voice. Eliza looked into it, watching the flames consume pine needles and twigs with greedy hunger. She didn't know why she was trusting this man, this stranger with a name that didn't sound like it belonged to any town's census, but he hadn't asked for anything. Not even thanks. And that was rare. The next day they moved early. The path Hawk chose wound through terrain that twisted like a serpent, thick with underbrush and half-forgotten trails, marked only by the signs he seemed born to read. Broken twigs, bent grass, faint tracks in the frost. Eliza carried Josie when she tired, and Hawk took the lead, always scanning the horizon, always listening. By noon the sky darkened with sudden gray. A storm was rolling in, quick and hard. Thunder rumbled from beyond the ridge. Hawk spoke only once. We need cover. They found it in a hollow beneath a rock shelf, just deep enough to shield them from the worst of the rain. Wind clawed at the trees above, sending pine needles in swirling flurries. Eliza wrapped herself around Josie as Hawk sat facing the open forest, rifle across his knees. This isn't just a storm, he muttered. Eliza watched him. What do you mean? He glanced toward the woods. Smoke's been on the wind all day. Wood smoke, not storm fire. Someone's close. Close enough to track. Her breath caught, and her fingers tightened around Josie. Do you think it's Thomas? Could be. Could be someone else looking to earn something easy. Eliza swallowed hard. She wanted to believe the worst had already happened. That being left at the altar had been her trial. But trials don't end where shame begins. They stretch, long and brutal. That night, they didn't light a fire. Josie slept between them, but the silence was different now, charged, brittle. Eliza lay awake, watching Hawk, who hadn't closed his eyes once. His breath was steady, but every so often his head tilted as if hearing something far away. You sleep with one eye open? She whispered. I sleep when I'm safe, he replied. Ever happen? He didn't answer. Sometime past midnight, Eliza stirred from a shallow sleep. Hawk was gone. Panic gripped her for a heartbeat, but then she saw him return through the trees, walking in deliberate silence, a small pouch in one hand. He knelt, pulled out a root, some dried herbs, found what I needed. For what? Josie's cough. Eliza blinked, surprised. She hasn't coughed since last week. You mentioned it yesterday. I remember things. She watched him grind the herbs into a fine powder with the back of his knife, mixing them with water from his flask. He handed it to her. Small sips. Once a day. Keeps her strong. She took it slowly, eyes locked on him. You don't talk much, but you notice everything. Talk's overrated. I've known men who'd talk a storm into silence just to hide from their own. I've known those too. Their eyes met again, and for a moment, Eliza felt something shift. Less like attraction, more like recognition. Two people who had stopped believing in softness, yet were forced to share warmth simply because the world outside had frozen them too deep to survive alone. They moved again by dawn. The forest was brighter now, dappled with light but still treacherous. At a narrow pass, Josie slipped on a wet stone. Hawk caught her before she hit the ground. She looked up at him, wide-eyed. You're strong, she said. He crouched too, her level. You are too. Eliza watched the exchange, surprised again. Hawk was always careful not to speak much to the girl, but when he did, it landed like iron bells. Clean, clear, and unforgettable. By midday, they came to a river, swollen from storm runoff. The current moved fast. Too fast. "We cross here?" Eliza asked. "No choice," Hawk said. "They're behind us." "How close?" "Close enough I smell their tobacco." Eliza hesitated. She looked at the water, then at Josie. "I'll take her," Hawk said. She didn't argue. He wrapped Josie in his coat, lashed it to his chest, and entered the river. The current fought him immediately, pulling at his legs like a living thing. Eliza held her breath as he stumbled once, caught himself. The water rose past his waist. Then chest, then shoulders. But he made it. Josie clung to him, soaked and shivering but smiling with pride. Eliza crossed next, her skirt dragging, her legs numbing. When she stumbled midstream, Hawk was already halfway back, grabbing her elbow and steadying her with the same instinct he'd shown her daughter. On the other side, they didn't stop to rest. That evening, they found the carcass of a rabbit hanging from a snare. Hawk raised his rifle instantly. "Fresh, not mine." A beat passed. Then a voice from behind the trees. "Didn't mean to spook you." They turned as a man stepped into view, older, with a slouched hat and eyes that gleamed like broken glass. Names: Merrill, trapper by trade. Eliza stepped behind Hawk instinctively. "You alone?" Hawk asked. "Always. Company's overrated." Merrill offered a grin, but Hawk didn't return it. The trapper pointed to Josie. "Cute girl? Yours?" Eliza didn't answer. "I got meat, fire too. If you're not looking for trouble, I ain't either." They followed reluctantly. Not out of trust, but necessity. Hunger made fools of better people. Around a fire in a clearing, Merrill cooked meat and told stories, half-lies wrapped in truth. He said he once trapped a black bear with nothing but a net and a prayer. Eliza didn't laugh. Hawk didn't blink. Later, as Josie drifted off in her arms, Merrill leaned in closer. "You know, I heard some talk down south. Bounty out for a woman with a kid. Bride ran from her wedding, took something that didn't belong to her. Man wants her back." Eliza froze. Hawk's hand moved quietly to his rifle. Merrill smiled. "Don't worry, I ain't no bounty man, but stories like that, they draw all kinds." Eliza didn't sleep that night. At first light, Hawk was ready. "We move. Now." Merrill watched them leave, face unreadable, but as they disappeared into the woods, he didn't follow. Not yet. By afternoon, Eliza's legs ached. Josie rode, on Hawk's back now, arms around his neck, giggling softly when he pointed out wildflowers. Eliza noticed how he softened around her daughter, even if only in the smallest ways. A lifted brow, a second glance. Not affection exactly, but something close. As the sun dipped low, they reached a rise that overlooked a broad meadow. In the yaoi distance, a plume of smoke rose from a small cabin. Eliza's breath caught. "My aunt's place." Relief flooded her chest. Josie squirmed with excitement. "We'll stop here," Hawk said. "You'll be safer behind walls." Eliza nodded, but something about his tone made her pause. "You're not staying." Hawk shifted, looking out over the trees. "This was the end of the path I promised. I delivered you, that's all." "You came this far. Doesn't that mean something?" He didn't answer, just handed Josie down gently and stepped back. Eliza stood still, unsure. Part of her wanted to argue, to demand answers for things that hadn't been said. But another part knew. Some people aren't meant to be held. They come like fire and leave before they burn too bright. As they approached the cabin, her aunt stepped outside, eyes wide. Josie ran to her with a joyful shriek. Eliza turned once more. Hawk was already disappearing between the trees. She didn't call after him, but she watched until the forest swallowed him whole. The cabin's hearth crackled softly, casting flickering shadows across the worn wooden walls. Eliza sat near the fire, her gaze fixed on the dancing flames while Josie played quietly with a set of carved wooden animals her great-aunt had given her. The warmth of the room contrasted sharply with the cold uncertainty that had settled in Eliza's heart since Hawk's departure. Days passed, each one blending into the next. Eliza helped her aunt with daily chores, tending to the garden, mending clothes, and preparing meals. Yet despite the semblance of normalcy, a lingering unease gnawed at her. She couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was watching them. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, Eliza stood on the porch surveying the surrounding woods. The tranquility of the scene was deceptive. Her eyes scanned the tree line, searching for any sign of movement. Nothing. Just the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze. Inside, Josie's laughter rang out as she played with her toys. Eliza smiled, the sound a temporary balm to her frayed nerves. She turned to go back inside when a sudden rustle in the bushes caught her attention. Her body tensed, heart pounding. She peered into the fading light, trying to discern the source of the noise. Probably just a rabbit, she muttered to herself, stepping back into the cabin and bolting the door behind her. That night, sleep eluded her. She lay awake, listening to the creaks and groans of the old cabin, each sound amplified in the silence. Her mind replayed the events of the past weeks: the wedding, Thomas's betrayal, the journey through the wilderness, and Hawk's silent strength. She missed his presence more than she cared to admit. The next morning, Eliza decided to venture into town to gather supplies. She needed to replenish their food stores and perhaps find some fabric to make new clothes for Josie. Her aunt offered to watch Josie, allowing Eliza to travel unencumbered. The town was bustling with activity. Merchants hawked their wares, children darted between stalls, and townsfolk exchanged pleasantries. Eliza moved through the crowd, her senses on high alert. She kept her head down, avoiding eye contact, and completed her errands swiftly. As she exited the general store, a familiar voice stopped her in her tracks. "Eliza?" She turned slowly, dread pooling in her stomach. There, standing a few feet away, was Thomas. His once pristine suit was now rumpled, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. "Eliza, I've been looking for you," he said, stepping closer. She backed away, her voice cold. "Stay away from me." "Please, just hear me out," he pleaded. "I made a mistake. I was scared, overwhelmed. But I've had time to think, and I want to make things right." Eliza's eyes narrowed. "You left me at the altar, humiliated me in front of everyone, and now you expect me to forgive you?" "I was wrong," he admitted. "But I still love you. I want to be a father to Josie." At the mention of her daughter, Eliza's anger flared. "You don't get to waltz back into our lives and play the hero. Josie doesn't need you. We don't need you." Thomas's expression hardened. "You're making a mistake. Think about Josie's future. She deserves a stable home, a father." "She has one," Eliza snapped, "and it's not you." Without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving Thomas standing alone amidst the bustling crowd. Back at the cabin, Eliza recounted the encounter to her aunt, who listened with a furrowed brow. "Be careful, Eliza," her aunt warned. "Men like Thomas don't take rejection lightly." "I can handle him," Eliza replied, though her voice lacked conviction. That night, as darkness enveloped the cabin, Eliza sat by the fire, deep in thought. A soft knock at the door startled her. She approached cautiously, peering through the small window. To her relief, it was Hawk. She opened the door and he stepped inside, his presence instantly calming. "I heard Thomas was in town," he said without preamble. Eliza nodded. "He found me, tried to convince me to take him back." Hawk's jaw tightened. "He won't stop." "I know," she sighed, "but I won't let him disrupt our lives again." Hawk studied her for a moment before speaking. "I'll stay nearby. Keep watch." "Thank you," she whispered, gratitude evident in her eyes. Over the next few days, Hawk remained a silent guardian, his presence a comforting constant. Eliza resumed her routines, but the tension lingered. She knew Thomas wouldn't give up easily. One afternoon, while Eliza and Josie were tending to the garden, a commotion erupted near the edge of the property. Hawk emerged from the woods, dragging a disheveled man by the collar. It was Thomas. I found him lurking near the cabin, Hawk said, his voice laced with anger. Eliza's eyes blazed. What were you doing here, Thomas? I just wanted to see Josie, he stammered. I miss her. You lost that right when you abandoned us, she retorted. Thomas's eyes darted between Eliza and Hawk. So this is your new man? The silent protector? Hawk stepped forward, his presence imposing. Leave. Now. Thomas hesitated, then turned and fled into the woods. Eliza watched him go, a mix of relief and apprehension washing over her. Later that evening, as the sun set, Eliza and Hawk sat on the porch, the silence between them comfortable. Thank you, she said softly. Hawk nodded. I'll always protect you and Josie. Eliza looked at him, her eyes filled with emotion. You've done more for us than anyone ever has. Hawk met her gaze. You're strong, Eliza. But even the strongest need someone to lean on. She reached out, taking his hand in hers. I'm glad it's you. As the stars emerged, casting their gentle light over the cabin, a sense of peace settled over them. The road ahead remained uncertain, but together they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The air had grown colder in the days that followed Thomas's last intrusion. A storm lingered on the horizon, both in the sky and in Eliza's heart. The leaves rustled with whispers of coming change, and the cabin felt smaller with each breath. Hawk remained close, never straying far into the wilderness as he once did, his silence now holding the weight of constant vigilance. Josie sensed the shift in atmosphere. She clung to Eliza more often, eyes darting toward the windows when the wind howled, her childlike laughter replaced with quiet questions. Is the bad man gone, Mama? Eliza knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from Josie's face. He's far away, sweetheart. You're safe now. But she wasn't certain of that. Not anymore. One late afternoon, as storm clouds bruised the sky and thunder rolled low in the distance, Hawk returned from his usual patrol with urgency in his stride. Eliza met him at the door, her chest tightening at the look in his eyes. Tracks, he said. Fresh. More than one set. They're circling the property. Thomas? She asked. Not just him, Hawk replied grimly. He's not alone. Eliza felt her knees weaken. What do we do? We prepare, he said. Tonight will be different. They worked in silence, boarding up windows, hiding Josie in a small crawl space beneath the floor where she could breathe and listen, but remain unseen. Eliza kissed her daughter's forehead, tears pricking her eyes as she pulled the trap door, closed. Don't make a sound unless it's me or Hawk, she whispered. Darkness came fast with the storm. Rain began to patter against the roof, soft at first, then harder, like fingers drumming a warning. Hawk stood by the front door, shotgun in hand. Eliza clutched a pistol Hawk had given her weeks ago, one she never thought she'd need to use. They waited. The first sound came just after midnight. A branch cracked under the weight of a boot outside, then another. Voices, low, muffled, male. Hawk pressed a finger to his lips and nodded toward the side window. In a flash of lightning, figures appeared, 4, maybe 5. One of them stepped forward. Even from the shadows, Eliza recognized Thomas. His arrogance hadn't diminished. If anything, it had grown. Eliza, he called. Come out. Let's not make this messy. Hawk cocked his shotgun, aiming through the cracked window. Eliza's hands trembled as she held her pistol close to her chest. You bring men into my home? Threaten my child? She called. Out. You're more of a coward than I thought. Thunder boomed and Thomas laughed. You made your choice, Eliza. This is the consequence. You chose a savage over your own kind. Now open the damn door. A gunshot shattered the silence. 2. Close. Wood splintered above Eliza's head. She dropped to the floor. Hawk fired once, the blast echoing through the cabin. Screams followed from outside. They're coming, Hawk barked. The front door burst inward, slamming against the wall. A man rushed in, but Hawk met him with brutal force, striking him with the butt of the shotgun. Another figure lunged through the window and Eliza turned, firing her pistol. The man screamed, grabbing his shoulder, falling back into the dark. Gunfire exploded in every direction. Rain poured through the broken windows. The fire in the hearth sputtered but didn't die. Hawk moved like a ghost, swift and purposeful. Eliza, crouched behind the table, held her ground, her breath coming in gasps. Another man entered, Thomas. He saw her. Their eyes locked. His face twisted in something between rage and desperation. "I came back for you," he screamed. "We could have had everything." "You never loved me," Eliza whispered. "You loved control." He raised his gun. A sharp whistle cut through the chaos. Then, an arrow. It struck Thomas's hand, making him drop the weapon with a howl of pain. Behind him, silhouetted in the stormlight, stood a second figure. Hawk turned in surprise. It was Gray Elk. Eliza had only seen him once before, long ago, watching from the forest edge when Hawk had first brought her to safety. He was older, taller than Hawk, with a hawk feather in his braided hair and a calmness that pierced through the violence. Thomas turned to flee, stumbling toward the woods, blood trailing behind him. One of his men tried to drag him away, but Gray Elk moved like wind, swift, unrelenting. Another arrow flew. The man dropped. The others fled into the storm. Silence fell again, broken only by the moan of wind and the hiss of rain. Hawk lowered his weapon, breathing heavily. Eliza stood slowly, her hands shaking, her knees weak. "Josie," she gasped. She rushed to the trapdoor and flung it open. Josie's wide eyes blinked up at her. "It's over," Eliza said, lifting her daughter into her arms. "You're safe, now." Gray Elk approached the cabin, his expression unreadable. Hawk stepped forward and bowed his head slightly. The two men exchanged a look, one of history, of kinship, of battles fought together. "You came," Hawk said. "I watch over my brother," Gray Elk replied. They spoke few words, but Eliza sensed the depth between them. It wasn't just protection, it was family, forged by fire and time. As the rain began to subside, they buried the dead near the edge of the property, far from the cabin, far from Josie's sight. Hawk said little. Eliza watched him from the porch, Josie asleep in her arms. Later, after Gray Elk had departed back into the woods without a word, Hawk returned to the porch, his shoulders soaked and heavy. "He's gone?" Eliza asked. "He won't be back," Hawk said. "He's broken. The men he gathered, they came for coin, not conviction. They'll scatter." Eliza sat beside him. The sky had begun to clear, stars emerging one by one through rips in the clouds. The cabin, despite its shattered windows and bullet-pocked door, felt more like home than it ever had. "I never imagined I'd end up here," she murmured. "You survived it all," Hawk said. "No, we did." A long pause stretched between them, filled with the soft chirping of insects and the low rustle of trees drying in the night breeze. "Will you stay?" she asked. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "If you want, me too." "I do." He reached for her hand, rough fingers folding around hers. For the first time since her life had splintered beneath her, Eliza felt something unfamiliar. Hope. The storm had passed. The wounds would take time to heal, but the future no longer terrified her. It waited quiet and vast like the forest itself. And she would face it not alone, not afraid, but with strength born of fire, and a hand that would not let go. As dawn painted the sky in pale gold, Eliza stepped off the porch, Hawk at her side, Josie running barefoot through the wet grass. The world was still, the fight was done. But the journey had only just begun. Behind them, the cabin stood tall, scarred but whole. A monument not to what they had lost, but to what they had found, each other.